Well, good morning, everybody, and I hope you're all doing very, very well this beautiful day. I am preparing this devotion for January 18th, 2022. But you may be watching this at any time in the future, so we are welcoming you here to the channel. Please do look, and we have a lot of different devotions, a lot of different studies, basically. My devotions tend to be almost a little bit more of a study at times. But we are looking at John's Gospel, and we're in the 19th chapter. We're going to look at the verses 17 to 24 specifically, but we're going to back up and pick just a little bit of verse 16, because in this chapter of John, there's a couple of places where the transition from one verse to the next is just not, in my opinion, the most ideal. But they didn't ask me for some reason when they made the chapter and verse breaks. I don't know why. Perhaps because I was a long way from being born. But at any rate, we are in chapter 19 of John's Gospel, and we are dealing with the crucifixion of Christ. That is where we are at. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription, because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into four parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, to see who will get it." This was to fulfill what the scripture says, "They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots." Okay. There are a few things, of course, in John's gospel that are somewhat different than the synoptics, and in this, the crucifixion scene is, of course, one of those. Jesus is not assisted in carrying the cross to Golgotha. There's nobody there to help him. He's doing it by himself. And of course, as many of you may know, many scholars believe that he would have been just carrying the cross beam, the top bar, and not the entire cross. We don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that that's probably the case, to be honest. But here they do mention the two people on either side, but they don't talk about whether they're criminals or not, and there's not a good thief and a bad thief, and the thieves and the two men are not mocking Jesus or anything like that. There's no dialogue between them in John's gospel. But here we have Golgotha, the place of the skull. Of course, in Jerusalem, you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you have the Garden Tomb. And near the Garden Tomb, you have the place where they believe was the Golgotha. But the Church of the Holy Sepulchre believes that it encompasses the tomb and Golgotha both within its walls. And so you have this, that of course is the Catholic Church's opinion, among other churches' opinion of where the tomb was and the place of the skull, Golgotha. But the Garden Tomb, if you go to Jerusalem, that's a much clearer, whether it's the actual place or not, you definitely get more of the sense of what was going on. The Garden Tomb is what the tomb would have looked like. The place of this where they believe near there's a hillside. And when you look out on that hillside, it's much easier to get the emotion of the day than it is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is very, very well ornate. I mean, it's garish would be the word I would use. And there is nothing that resembles a rock wall. There's nothing that resembles a tomb in there anymore. It's all been built over, and they've modified it extensively. But the Garden Tomb, you can go in there and you can really get that sense of the finality and the dread, and especially as you look from there's a place where you can sit or stand and look up onto the hillside that they are presenting as being the place where Jesus was crucified. That is a very emotional place and I would encourage you to go to the Garden Tomb if you ever get over to Israel. But I digress. Here, one of the first things they talk about is the inscription. We have the inscription in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. And my son would be able to read two of those three. He's fluent in Latin and Greek, but I could not read any of those because I don't know any of the three. But those three languages in that place, the reason he chose those was anyone that was literate would have been able to read at least one of those in that region at that time. Now, of course, the mass majority, probably 90-some% or more of the people would be illiterate and unable to read, which is one of the things that is stunning about Jesus. Jesus was able to read the scroll in the synagogue, so he was at least to some degree educated. That is proof of that. But at any rate, here they are going through this thing of they have stripped Jesus, and of course, as on the crucifix I have on my wall up here, which is actually a deathbed cross from the Catholic heritage, that's up there. It's kind of an ominous saying, because I don't know if I've told you the story, but I bought that just the weekend before I came down with COVID. So I kind of was sitting there recovering from COVID going, gee, maybe that was an ominous saying. But at any rate, on that crucifix, and almost all crucifixes that I have ever seen, I can't recall ever seeing one differently, Jesus has on a loincloth. But of course, we should all realize that on the cross, Jesus was stark naked. He was stripped of everything, because that's a part of the whole process, is not just that we're going to kill you, but we're going to humiliate you as much as we possibly can. And nakedness in the Jewish culture, especially for a Jewish man, that would have been humiliating beyond pale. So to them, that was an awful thing to do. Disrespectful, the whole 9 yards. And the point I bring that up for, and of course they're talking about dividing the clothes, that is to fulfill Psalm 22 verse 18, that they cast lots for my clothes. So that is a completion of prophecy there. But the reason for stripping them, and the reason that's important, that Jesus is stark naked, is it drives home to us he has been beaten beyond belief. If you've ever seen The Passion of Christ by Mel Gibson, if you have not seen that, then I think you need to go watch it. Be prepared. It's graphic, but it's probably the closest representation that we have in cinema of what actually occurred. And I can remember going to see that when my son was a little boy, and he was just demolished by that. I considered not taking him, but I wanted him to understand the gravity of the situation, and it did, and it is horribly graphic. I've seen it twice, actually. Gail and I went to the premiere of it in Omaha. We got free tickets from the Christian station at that time because we were advertising with them. But at any rate, Jesus would have been just a bloody pulp on that cross, and then naked to the world, beaten, battered, and naked, and humiliated. This drives home how important you and I and all that Jesus died on the cross are to him. He's not only willing to endure the pain, the suffering, but the humiliation and the denigration of him, of God. We're going to denigrate God, to humiliate God. That is what God was willing to do for you and I. So that's where I'm going to leave you at. We'll pick up at verse 25 tomorrow, and we'll go through verse 30. And I've got my own. This is a bit of scripture that I have a lot of thoughts about, kind of alluded to it a little bit as we've gone along, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Have a blessed day, and please, 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 as I like to say, be a blessing to someone today. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.